Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. Lieutenant General Bipin Rawat's appointment as Army Chief has become the latest flashpoint between the government and the opposition days after a political row over the recall of high-value currency washed out Parliament's winter session. The Congress said it wasn't questioning Rawat's abilities but wanted to know why two senior people were superseded as the government did not follow a 3 decades-old tradition of elevating the senior-most officer. Such political sparring over the Army Chief's appointment is unusual as parties usually steer clear of commenting on what is seen as an apolitical institution. But within hours of Rawat's appointment on Saturday, the Congress and the left had criticized it. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will discuss the row over the appointment of the next Army Chief of India. Joining me on the program today are TSR Subramanian, former Cabinet Secretary, Major General GD Bakshi, Defence Expert, Bharat Bhushan, Editor Catch News, and Bharat Karnad, Research Professor, National Security Studies, Centre for Policy Research. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. General, I'd like to start with you, of course, and find out what is the standard procedure of appointing a Chief of the Army?
Is that addressed to me, please?
Yes, Lieutenant General, go ahead.
Okay. Now, what I would like to state is that by and large, we have followed a policy so far in which the seniormost is selected as the chief. The seniormost of the contenders for the post of the Army Chief is, has usually been selected as the Chief of the Army Staff, except for a few rare exceptions here and there. So whenever the seniority principle is bypassed, it does evoke its share of, criticism, comments or speculation as to why it has been done. In the instant case, I think we have a scenario wherein there is almost a heightened state of war, a heightened state of conflict in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and to that extent we are seeing that the selection of the Army Chief even in Pakistan was influenced by this factor of there being heightened tensions in the state of J&K. For example, there were 3 corps commanders in the running in Pakistan. One was the Multan Corps commander, the Strike Corps commander from the Armored Corps. Generally, then there was the 31 Corps commander from Bhavalpur, which was the semi-desert terrain profile. And then there was General Bajwa, who was selected because he had a great deal of operational experience in Jammu and Kashmir. I think the case was quite similar on our side. We had 3 contenders, and I know each of them personally, and they're brilliant, hard-working achievers, all 3 of them. I have known them since the time they were cadets in the Indian Military Academy. Both Bipin Rawat as also General Praveen Bakshi had won the Sword of Honours in their time. The fact of the matter is that they were all very competent, but the terrain profiles based upon an evaluation of their experiential profiles with the rising threats in J&K, the government chose General Bipin Rawat, who has had about 10 years of service experience, hands-on experience in J&K and counter-terrorist operations.
Sure.
He has been a battalion commander on the line of actual control with China. He has been a brigade commander in an RR sector in the valley. He then commanded the 19th Infantry Division in Uri, very directly concerned with this. He was then GOC 3 Corps at the time of the surgical strike in Myanmar. So seeing this experiential profile, I think the government had decided, I don't think it was now, it was some times back, the government had decided to have him as the Army Chief, and that is why he was moved in as the Vice Chief to get into picture.
Okay, point taken.
At the same time,
yes,
there were media speculations Can I just finish? At
Yeah,
the
very
same
quickly.
time, there were media speculations that the government would also be selecting a chief, a long-awaited chief of the defence staff, stroke, permanent chairman chiefs of staff. You see, this we were all anticipating that since General Praveen Bakshi was senior, he would be so selected, and we are still hopeful that the government will not waste out a very talented officer, an upright and straightforward officer, and select him as the long-awaited chairman defence staff, the chief of defence staff, or the chairman chiefs of staff, which is highly essential for tri-service integration, synergy and cooperation.
Okay, fair enough. Your point taken, Major General. Mr. Bhushan, do you buy that argument? This is precisely the same argument that the government has been floating in the media as well, talking about looking at the present scenario. Rawat is the right man for the job, and that's why he's been appointed as the next Chief of Army Staff.
Well, actually, yes, I buy the argument because his experience in counterinsurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, in Northeast, his posting in Tawang on the LAC, he's the right kind of person for what's happening in Jammu and Kashmir, what's happening on our western border. I think those people who are questioning General Rawat's appointment are unnecessarily politicizing an institution which does not need to be politicized. After all, it is the prerogative of the government of the day to choose the army chief, most suitable for the circumstances it sees the country is facing. It isn't as if this is a sacrosanct principle that the senior-most person must become the army chief. It has happened in the past, but also it's been flouted in the past. I think its government is well within its rights. If you look at armies and professional armies elsewhere, like the United States, France, Germany, even next door Pakistan, the seniority principle is not the most sacrosanct principle. The question is, what is required for the nation's security at that point of time? None of these people have ever questioned General Rawat's competence. He's a highly competent officer with wide-ranging experience, not only within India, but also in peacekeeping in Ghana. There's an article today about how he won over the, in Congo, and how he won over the hearts and minds of the local people through his operational competence. So a highly competent officer is being appointed, and his appointment is unnecessarily being politicized by our parties. They look for excuses to politicize things. I mean, you can have differences in policies with the government, you can criticize them in parliament, but not on an issue like this.
Indeed. Professor Karnad, what happens to an institution where seniority is sacrosanct? What kind of a message does it send down to the lower ranks?
Well, look, I don't think seniority is sacrosanct at all. Very early in the in the history of the Republic, Jawaharlal Nehru, then the Prime Minister, wrote to Sardar Baldev Singh, the Defence Minister, who had asked him about the standards to use, the metrics to use, to appoint the first Indian CNC India, Commander-in-Chief India. And he said there's seniority and there's merit. So which do I emphasize? And Nehru made a noting in that response to Baldev Singh. He said, look, if you take seniority, very soon in time, seniority will edge out merit. It's a very, very pertinent point he made in 1948, if I recall right. There's something to be borne in mind when people talk about sacrosanct this, sacrosanct that, you see. The government of the day is free to choose whoever it wishes for whatever reasons it wishes to appoint a person to a post, and certainly in the military services. So there's nothing sacrosanct about it. And yes, it may also be that the appointed person is someone that has the government's confidence. That's also a metric. I don't think there's an issue here at all. And I think if it is merit, as has been touted about General Rawat, that's an excellent thing. I'd consider it a better standard to apply to anybody, applying any position in the government of India, than seniority. What is seniority except an accident of birth and of entry into service? That shouldn't matter. What it is that you have done by way of your skill sets, your competence and your record in service ought to be the decisive element. And insofar as the government thinks that General Rawat, in a sense, reflects these attributes, He has been given the chance, and that's all to the good.
Mr. Subramanian, that's how corporates work. You know, it's not the experience that matters, or it's the kind of work that you do and how you do it and whether you're fit for that job. Only then you choose a particular person for the job and not seniority. Should that how it should be done across the line?
Well, I'm not sure that we can bring corporates into this. There's a different perspective. The motivations are different in the corporate sector. I think I'll pick up the points made already, 3 or 4 separate points. Firstly, I don't know the service rules or selection rules for this particular post. But as far as I know, no service selection rule has been violated. As far as I know, number one. Number two, the universal principle, not just the army, in any government service of any sort, is as you go up the ladder, it is rejection of the unfit, and selection becomes a lower criterion at the bottom. As you go up that ladder, then the unfit and selection become equally important. As you go to the very top, selection becomes absolutely the key area. In other words, the principle gets reversed as you go. So, for example, Joint Secretary's post, typically 50% are rejected on the basis of unfit, and the top 50% are taken on the basis of, as you go up, additional secretary, for example, out of 10 available, then you are very, very close to absolute merit, with seniority become an important principle. When you come to the very top, that's the final discretion with the government. Usually there's a short list. So look at the chief secretary's selections all over states. Look at cabinet secretary stats all over the state. Look at all civilian. I'm not familiar with the exact nitty-gritty here. I believe exceptions have been made earlier here. In any case, number one. Number two, the moment a person becomes a lieutenant general, he is high quality. We take it for granted. I don't think we need. I think it's wrong for us to discuss sitting here the merits of individual, pros and cons, etc., etc. It's a selection post. We have to, at that particular point of time, without bringing in politics, we have to accept that the people finally in charge, namely the political authority, will apply the discretion, choose the right person from among the list for that. My last point is this. It is very unfortunate. We saw in Calcutta, we should not bring army into this. Air Force, army, we should not at all bring into this particular area. These are all things which are sacrosanct. These are all highly respected institutions. Neither should create problems within the army or in the armed forces or among the general public. I think these should be. My last point is what General Bakshi referred to. I remember when I was cabinet secretary, the issue of a chief of staff or the sort of a kind of coordinator general has been there. There are pros and cons on both sides. I don't know what the thinking is. I don't know what the thinking in this particular area. I don't know if General Bakshi is privy to exactly discussions there. I hope not. I sincerely hope that those 3 or 4 people who decided their own national interest appropriately, taking into account that all the 3 contenders are outstandingly good, and then choose one of them as the most appropriate. I think the matter should rest there, and this typically should not be a matter of public debate.
Indeed, indeed. Major General Bakshi, you know, what happens to the 2 other, senior lieutenant generals, that is Mr. Haris and the other general who are senior, more senior to Rawat at the moment? I mean, what kind of a message is sent out to them? Do they get accommodated in other positions as you are mentioning, or do they in fact resign, or what happens next?
You know, as per the service, norms, as per the service ethics, the moment you are superseded, you put in your papers, you resign. That is the norm. You do not like to serve under your junior, and if you have been overlooked, by and large in the armed forces, people, especially at that level, people prefer to resign. It had happened in the case of, when General Sinha, very reputed, who recently passed away, he was superseded by General Vaidya on the ground that he did not have adequate combat experience, and General Vaidya, who was MVC Bar, had fought in 65 and 71 war and therefore had greater combat experience. So he was superseded, and the day he was superseded, he put in his papers. In the instant case, the supersession so-called, like I totally go with Mr. Subramanian, there is nothing sacrosanct about seniority. The fact is that a panel of 5 names is given to the government, and it is its prerogative. It is the government's prerogative to choose one of them as the chief. The speculation, may I put Mr. Subramanian at ease? I am not privy to what were the discussions, but it was there, Mr. Subramanian, in the open media. These speculations have been there in the media for quite some time. From where they have emanated, we are not very certain, but they are there in the media that the government is very closely was looking for a chairman, joint chiefs of staff, because that was the recommendation of the Kargil Review Committee. That was in the year of the Lord 2000. So that's almost 16 years since that recommendation first came. Then the recommendation was again repeated by a former cabinet secretary who also said that instead of a chairman, a chief of defense staff, you go in for a permanent chairman, chiefs of staff, rather than the rotating kind of a toothless body that, or the toothless appointment that exists now. And then, if I understand correctly, there has been a third commission which has possibly also confirmed the same to the government, that it is an operational exigency. In this era of high-tech warfare, where the 3 services have to work in close concert and cooperation, then you do need a military numero uno who can finally decide on the conflict, who has the competence, the military competence to decide if there are any differences, strong differences of opinions between the services, and take one line and give it to the government. So that has been in the offing for almost 16 years now.
Indeed.
After the Kargil Review Committee. I strongly feel it is an operational exigency, and I think we must, it is about time we have it. The Chinese have it, the Pakistanis have it, any armed forces which are worth their salt in the world around have this arrangement, because tri-service cooperation is a sine qua non. It is a very important requirement of modern day warfare. It
Sure.
is a battle winning factor.
Your point
So
taken,
if
General.
Pakistan can have it, if China can have it, I don't think we should let governmental inertia, bureaucratic inertia, let it hang for 16 years.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Subramanian, you want to make a point?
2 comments. I think we
Yeah.
are now diverting attention to the principle of having a general chief of staff. That's a separate issue. This probably deserves a separate discussion. And as I said, that the issue probably is not as open and shut or as clear-cut as General Bakshi, for whom I have enormous respect, that there are pros and cons in Indians in subcontinental terms, etc., historical terms. There are all kinds of reasons. I'm not going into that. I'll go back to the first questions you mentioned of what the propriety of those who are superseded. Yeah, he's right. Technically, it's a wrong thing to say. Such a brilliant people. He technically superseded. In other words, he didn't make the cut at the final level. So there is an old tradition that Joes overlooked. For example, Rausab in 1980 was overlooked for, he became cabinet secretary overlooking 3 others who were senior to him. They were all accommodated. In the states, DGs who are not made operational DGs, where others were accommodated with sinecure posts. In civilian system, that facility is there to have sinecure post without interfering with the normal line of business.
Right.
In the army, probably because the command structure, that luxury is not probably is there. And I have now sadly see the final other side of the picture I want to deliberately mention, not to debate it. This should not also mean that the political executive has the opportunity to start interfering with the higher echelons of management of the income tax service, of the Reserve Bank service, etc., where the same kinds of selection issues come. I mean, this is a very critical point here, that this should not be seen as a, so there has to be a Lakshman Rekha somewhere, that politics at the final level should be eschewed. At the same time, politics should not govern who comes in there, merit should come in. So I think these are the kind of ramifications of this issue.
Indeed, talking about those ramifications, Mr. Bhushan, the appointments, the recent appointments, be it the CVC, be it the CIC or the interim CBI director, have all come under criticism. Is it a matter of the opposition just politicizing the entire issue, or is there a trend emerging?
No, the CBI case doesn't really fit in because there is a procedure there. There is a selection committee which has the leader of the opposition, etc. That is why the gentleman who was made head of CBI was made acting director, and he will no longer be the acting director once a new CBI chief is selected. Army is a special institution. Those who are suggesting that seniority should have been there are also indirectly saying that there are political, parochial and non-professional considerations that have gone into the selection of the current army chief. I think these are the people who are really maligning the army, not those who are selecting, because as far as the government is concerned, they have said merit and suitability is what will determine who the next chief of army staff would be. I also think it is good that merit and suitability have taken precedence because it removes predictability in these promotions. And if there is predictability, people at the top level start playing safe. They become timid. The last thing you need is a timid army chief. So predictability has been removed, merit and suitability has been promoted, and if this principle is used elsewhere also, I think very good. But the CBI case is not analogous to the selection of the army chief.
All right. And Professor Karnad, as far as India's focus now, as far as the army is concerned, I think a message has been sent to Pakistan as well in the appointment that, India is going to focus on the international border. The Northern Command is going to receive a free hand now, maybe, as far as the army working independently is concerned.
I don't know about message to Pakistan. It's a message, I think, basically to the army, that he's the new commander. I think we tend to read too much into, signals being sent to our adversaries and so on and so forth. This is an internal matter of state. The army commander or chief has been appointed. He'll do his job. Well, yes, the neighboring countries will be mindful of the fact that General Rawat has experience on the LOC and on the LAC. He's a counterinsurgency, he's been engaged in it, and he has operational skills of the kind that are required, so that he can empathize with the commanders, formation commanders, unit commanders who are working out there in the field. So, yes, but I don't think this has sort of the kind of ramifications you think it has in the larger sphere. Let's not try to blow this up as something beyond the army.
Indeed.
It's just the army's thing, and army chief has been appointed, and that's it.
Okay, all right. Major General, as going forward now, what's the focus going to be really like under Rawat? Is there anything going to change as far as the army is concerned? How is it that he's going to run the army?
Well, you see, like I said, every officer has an experiential profile. And I go along with the people who said that previously, for quite some time, a lot of predictability had crept into the selection of the top army chief, in the sense that if you had the right date of birth and if you had passed out high in the order of merit, just these two dates were enough, and from the time that an officer was a brigadier, it was forecast that he would be the chief, and he became the chief. A number of them it has happened that way. How can it be unless the government has evaluated his performance as a major general, as a divisional commander, as a corps commander, as an army commander? He has to perform, he has to deliver, and I think that actual demonstrated performance is critical, is far more important than your date of birth. And to that extent, what is the quality of experience that you have brought to the table? What is the quality of operational combat experience? You see, the army is a fighting organization. Therefore, if an officer has combat experience, I'm afraid he has an edge. He has an edge. Now, the problem that is coming in recent times, and one must be candid, is that the armored corps, a lot of the other arms, they have not been getting their share of combat experience for the simple fact that the nation hasn't fought a major war since 1971. So some of them do complain that, look, what is our fault? Well, you haven't put me to a war, you haven't given me an opportunity to gain combat experience. So then why am I being, discriminated against? This is what is being said. But I don't think that argument holds, because if, you can always volunteer to join the Rashtriya Rifles. Nobody can stop you. You can volunteer to go to the Siachen Glacier and serve. You can volunteer for the Special Forces. If you are keen on gaining your share of combat experience, you will get it. And I do think a man who has faced bullets is much better placed to take combat judgments. That was the principle on which Bipin Rawat has been selected.
Sure.
And to that extent, his operational profile does give him that advantage. But what I would like to state is that in the instant case, why such a big hullabaloo has been created about? Because the supersession is not just one down as it was previously. It is three. It is three down.
Fair enough. I think you put things into perspective for us.
I've got put in their resignations.
I've got 1 minute left on the program, so I'd like to get closing comments from my other three guests as well.
The fact is that...
starting with you, Professor Karnad, your final closing comments on the program.
No, I think just to go back into history, it is a curious irony that the precedent about emphasizing seniority was set actually by an army man, General Rajendra Singh Ji. He was Prime Minister's choice to be the first Sikh, India, Commander-in-Chief India. But he deferred to General Cariappa. He told the Prime Minister, look, he's my senior. I'd rather you give it to him.
Right.
So Nehru had no choice. I mean, after he rejected Nehru's offer. And unfortunately, he set the wrong precedent.
Sure.
So had he been, because he had the operational experience precisely that Cariappa lacked. Cariappa had no operational experience whatsoever. He was in Hyderabad State Forces, spent most of the Second World War doing what is very difficult to know.
I'm running out of time,
Yeah.
so I'm going to get my other two guests as well to start. Mr. Bhushan, your final closing comments.
I'm saying that General Bipin Rawat has been appointed as the army chief. Let's respect that decision. Let's not do anything that undermines either his appointment or his reputation. And at the same time, nobody should comment on, the other two officers are exceptionally bright officers. They're competent people. But, as you go higher up on the mountain, it's rarer the air and only one person can stand there. And a competent officer, a good officer has been chosen, and we should just leave it at that.
Indeed. Very quick closing comment from you, Mr. Subramanian.
Firstly, every institution is much bigger than the individuals involved here. In this particular case, all three are extremely competent. I think the matter should rest there. A selection. I think the committee had exercised its prerogative to do a selection on merit. We should respect that, number one. For me, the larger message is even more important. We should not bring the army into this kind of a debate, national debate we saw in Calcutta and elsewhere. This is wrong because it is really one very final. I'll just take 10 seconds here. What General Bakshi said, we also need to introspect one element for which probably a separate program is required now.
Indeed.
Since the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, huge ground conditions have changed. Naxalism, domestic terror, etc., etc. The army should also, to some extent, start, like he said, the relevance of the armored corps. Are they now fitting fully into the government's plan to addressing the new economic threats, cyber threats? Are they here? Are they still need to get updated beyond the past 40 years? I think that's a question I want to leave that. I want to leave that thought.
Indeed, we'll leave on that thought, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you so much for watching.